Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our coaching, publishing, executive ghostwriting, and podcast production services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Patrick Huey, author of History Lessons for the Modern Investor. Patrick, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it.
Are you ready to get started?
Absolutely.
All right. Question number 1. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
Wow. The one piece of advice that I think every prospective author needs before they even hit publish on their word processor or their computer or whatever they're writing on is probably to plan to invest in their own success. And by that I mean, if you're not willing to do a few things to help finish the process as well as to get your work published, you're probably better off just letting it die a quiet and humble death versus putting yourself out there and failing. I think that you really need to invest in things like potentially a writing coach, somebody who can get you over the finish line with a finished product. And I think you probably need to invest in some editing and layout work. And I think you probably need to invest in some marketing expertise as well. On the last piece, I'm lucky I'm married to a marketing expert, so I saved myself some money that way.
Yeah, one of the things I always talk about to my clients is you have to have the CEO mentality where you have to outsource to a great editor, to a great formatter, and to make sure that you have a very clear vision with your book, and most importantly, what you want to get out of the book and what you want your readers to get out of the book. And once you can get really clear on that vision, just having the correct editor and the formatter to really polish it up and make it look professional, it makes all the difference.
Absolutely, and I think that a lot of first-time authors come into it thinking, you know, I'm the next Dan Brown or I'm the next whoever, and they don't take a realistic approach and say, you know what, this is my first work. I'm going to learn how to be a writer with this work. I'm going to learn how to get published, and then I'm going to take it to the next level from there. And I think those are important points to keep in mind, is that you have to be realistic, and you've got to invest in the process.
Exactly. You have to spend money to make money.
Amen.
Well, what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
Well, I mean, I think that the hardest part for me was finishing the first book. It took me 4 years really to, again, get over the finish line with a finished product. That process is really hard to develop. Becoming a writer is not natural. It's not easy. But once it's ingrained in you, it certainly does make it a lot easier to sit down and write and know what you're doing and have an end goal in mind that's achievable. But I have to say that the hardest thing for me about getting published the first time was the ego blow of realizing that the traditional channels of publishing are not really open to a first-time author who doesn't have a natural network established that a publishing house would be interested in. So, you know, that rejection of, you know, going to a large publisher, going to an agent and having them say, you know, look, unless you've got, you know, 1 million followers on Twitter who are going to buy this book, we're not interested.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the biggest changes, especially I would say at least the last 5 to 6 years, is there's a lot of publishers out there, traditional publishers, independent publishers, bigger publishers, and they're actually scouting talent. They're actually approaching people that do have those million plus followers or 100,000 followers on Twitter and Instagram, and then pitching them and going, hey, why don't you write this book? We'll get it published for you, because these traditional and independent publishers, they don't want to do the marketing. They just want to help you get the book out there. They want you and your platform to do it. And if you don't have that, then it is much better to go the independent route or to work with the hybrid type of publisher that's going to help you get your story out there. And most importantly, you control the royalties and you keep the creative control with all of your content.
That's right. And I like the CEO mentality that you talked about previously, because in my day job, I am the CEO of my own investment firm. I'm the owner operator. So, I took that mentality really with me when we started writing this book and saying, okay, if I'm going to own it, I'm going to own it. And I don't want, some publishing house telling me how it's going to go and what the typeface is going to look like. And I got very into the details of this book because it was a labor of love. And it being my first book, I really wanted to understand the process that much more. And like you said, that's that CEO mentality. And, I get that. My day job is talking about risk and investment. And, for a large publishing house, I would be a huge risk because I don't have that following on Twitter or Instagram yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And in marketing, that's one of the biggest keys. And that's going to transition nicely into our next question. And that is to please share a marketing strategy that you have used in your book launch that worked well.
Yeah. I got to be honest, I don't think that I would pin it down to one strategy. I think that it really is a matter of coming up with a total marketing plan, because to me, strategy indicates that you would do one thing, and really what it's going to take to sell books is doing everything, a little bit of everything. And I took the liberty of looking back at some of the previous shows on your podcast, and I saw things mentioned like, putting the book on your car. I saw things mentioned like a social media plan. We did all that. So I've got the magnets are still on my truck, highlighting history lessons for the modern investor. And we drove around the country with those attached. We had a spare tire cover made with history lessons for the modern investor, and that went on the back of our RV as we were driving around the country this summer. We committed to doing one social media post a day on LinkedIn, on Instagram, and on Facebook. That is a this day in history type post, and that would then push people back to being able to go to Amazon and pick up the book to find out more. Those are just examples, and I think that, again, that's part of an overall plan. But I have to say my favorite marketing piece that we did was a good old-fashioned in-person book signing. I got to go, courtesy of the Oregon Historical Society, in December and sit down with about 90 other local authors with ties to the Pacific Northwest. And there's just no better way to learn to talk about your book than to talk about your book. And I did it, dozens of times that day with prospective buyers.
I love it. It almost sounds like the Get Published podcast greatest hits. I love the fact that you've been talking about some of these different things, because we've had some really innovative strategies on this show. I have a bachelor's in business. I have a master's degree in teaching, but I really feel that I've gained a doctorate in publishing, part through my own experience, but the other part is just been hosting this show. We've had 219 plus episodes, and we've had so many truly amazing guests on this show that have all of these outside the box strategies where, you actually have a magnet on your car with your book cover or a hook from the book. And the funny thing is, you go to a gas station, you go to the mall, people are going to actually stop you and go, hey, tell me about this. And I'm sure that happened to you many times, especially on your travels.
It did, and it's a little funny actually because you'll be driving down the road, especially when this was something new that we just put on the car, and people do the double take. And there were a couple of times where I'd think, why do people keep staring at us as they go down the road? Well, you want them staring. They're looking at that magnet, and that's why it's there.
Yeah, and it's literally $20 for a magnet on Vistaprint, and sometimes they have different deals that you can get them for almost for free. So it's not much of an investment. You pop it on the magnet, stick it to your car. It's going to stick on just about every car anyway. You can take it down the freeway. You don't have to worry about it falling off. And it really does catch the attention. We've seen some different tactics with people wearing on their clothing book covers, on their hats, or even having embroidery. And it's just amazing having those very small investments, and you're essentially a walk-in advertisement for your book. And it's not salesy, it generates a curiosity by the other person.
Yeah, I mean, I used the book signing as an example of having those conversations, and that's maybe a little more extreme example because you're doing it 15, 20 times in a 4 or 5 hour period. But you're talking about the same thing, which is starting the conversation. Nobody knows that you exist as an author until you tell them. And you either have to tell them verbally or you have to tell them with a visual. Visuals are strongly preferred, at least for an introduction. But at some point, you got to have that conversation. And anything you can do to spark that conversation, I say do it.
Absolutely. And I love the whole part of that. And that's probably what we're going to call the title of this episode, is developing a total marketing plan when launching your book. Because you're right, it isn't just one thing. It's not just Amazon marketing services. It's not just social media posts. You do have to have that multifaceted approach in addition to having a proper launch plan with book promo companies and combine it together. And I'd also mention being on podcasts, being on different shows, and making sure that those episodes are specifically released when your podcast is going out, but also additional episodes to come out a month or two after your book is out there to keep the momentum going.
Yeah, if I had one regret in this whole marketing process is not starting it sooner. I knew that we were going to get published in May of last year. I roughly had that timeline about 6 months in advance, and we didn't really jump on the marketing until about April or so. I would love to go back and redo a lot of those things because, to your point, having everything set up on a timeline that makes sense and reinforces everything else that you're doing with your giveaways and with your promotions and with your social media plan, that to me is very powerful, and it's an area that my second book I'm sure will have down.
Well, one thing I'll say too, one of the best things about when you are doing multiple books is you learn from every single launch. So I learned on my first launch, which ironically enough, that book, it was called Eat Less and Move More, was actually stuck in my head for 4 years until I finally got that book out there. Once I did, I literally spent half my time learning everything about publishing. I'm spending half the time doing that. And the other half, I spent everything, all the time I could, humanly possible, to learn about the marketing side, because you have to have the publishing and you have to have the marketing as well. And as you do every single book launch, you find 3 or 4 different things that you can do better on your next launch, and then you do it on your second launch. You do that. We did that with Motivation 101, and then we found some things on that launch we could do better. So then we did that for Positivity Attracts, and I've got 13 books out now. We're about to launch our 14th one. And you learn something every single time, not only for your books, but also when you're working with clients too. You're learning what works, what doesn't work, what can be tweaked, what can be improved. And it's just having that continuous improvement mindset. And it makes every launch that you do better and better and better, prepares you for the future.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and there's a lot of information out there now, too, where you don't have to learn from your own mistakes. You can learn from other people's, and hopefully, this podcast is an example of that. Learn from mine and have that marketing and follow-up plan in place, 3 to 6 months before you hit publish and go live.
Well, in worst case scenario, you can always do a redo. You can always create a second edition of your book. Typically, I recommend to my clients, wait 6 months, and if something didn't go correctly or something you want to do better, you just make a few adjustments in the book, a few updates, make a new cover. And the beautiful thing is when you upload it up to Amazon, they will treat it like a new version of the book. And so essentially you get the marketing redo.
Yeah, I don't know if you feel the same way as I do, but the finishing and publishing was not the end for me. I still have ideas that come to me that should probably go into the second edition at some point. So yeah, I think that's good advice, and certainly something that everybody can kind of take to market at some point.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about your favorite book. So what is your favorite book? And what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
Well, I assume you mean my favorite book other than History Lessons for the Modern Investor.
Yes.
Paul, I have been since a very young kid, kind of a Hemingway buff. So Papa has always been my favorite author. The Sun Also Rises has always been my favorite book. And the number one thing that Hemingway taught me is that writing is work. If you read anything that he wrote about the art and the science of writing, it's that it takes concentration. It is a job. And even though you just wrote something, you may fall in love with it instantly. You're still going to need to go back and rework it, edit it, and in his mind, always stripping out the extraneous to let the story shine through. So that's what I take from his work and from my favorite book, is that this is a process as well as an art.
And for a final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
My favorite quote, I actually, I came up with this one for my book. It's the lead quote as the book opens, and it's "Write the book only you can write." And I go on to say, in the first chapter of History Lessons that I don't know who actually said that. "Write the book only you can write" is a paraphrasing, we think, of a translation from the French author André Gide, who cautioned authors, grow fond of only that which you can find nowhere but in yourself. And when you kind of condense that down and Americanize it, it's write the book only you can write. And if there's better advice out there for aspiring authors, I haven't found it yet.
That's one of the best quotes we've had on the show. I love it.
Thank you.
Well, Patrick, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
Well, you won't be surprised to know, based on the total marketing plan, there are a few ways. So History Lessons for the moderninvestor.com is the website. You can go there, check out the book, the blog, and any updates. History Lessons Modern Investor on Instagram or our YouTube channel. And victoryindependentplanning.com or Patrick Huey, CFP on LinkedIn if you want to catch me during my day job.
Patrick, I want to thank you once again for being on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
Thank you, Paul, and thanks for helping the authors out there.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how you can be featured in our brand new Get Published business book, go to getpublishedpodcast.com.